I recognized the shift before anyone said a word. You develop an instinct for it after 26 years in the same building, the same corridors, the same conference rooms where decisions get made behind closed doors. That Tuesday morning at Orex Innovations felt different. The air carried a weight I couldn't name yet. People avoided eye contact in the elevator. Conversations stopped when I approached the break room. And when I walked past Brandon Keller's office, he turned away from the window so quickly it looked rehearsed. 26 years. I had watched this company grow from a scrappy startup in a converted textile mill to a global leader in biomedical data systems. I wrote the first version of our core algorithm on a whiteboard during a funding crisis in 2001, when investors were threatening to pull out and our entire future hung by a thread. They called it Wells' method back then. Marketing rebranded it later as the Orex Adaptive System. Sounded better in press releases. But that morning when I entered the glass-walled conference room on the executive floor, I knew exactly what was coming. Brandon sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 HR representatives I'd never seen before. Outside consultants, probably. The kind brought in to handle messy situations. He didn't stand when I entered. Didn't offer the usual corporate pleasantries. "Riley," he began, sliding a manila folder across the polished surface. "We're implementing a comprehensive organizational realignment. If you're new here and enjoying these powerful stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Let me know in the comments what part of today's story touched you most." Realignment. The word people use when they mean demolition. Your role no longer fits our strategic vision moving forward. His tone was flat, practiced, drained of anything human. "We're offering a severance package that reflects your tenure, but effective immediately, we'll need you to surrender your credentials and exit the premises." I stared at him. Not with anger, not yet. Just a cold, crystallizing clarity. 26 years of sleeping in my office during system crashes. 26 years of missing family holidays because our servers needed emergency patches. 26 years of training engineers who went on to become directors while I remained the quiet architect nobody remembered to promote. "You're firing me," I said. "Not a question." "We're separating," one of the HR consultants corrected, her voice artificially warm. "This isn't personal." I almost laughed. Everything about this was personal. Brandon had joined Orex 5 years ago with venture capital backing and a degree from a business school that taught confidence but not competence. He'd spent those 5 years taking credit for systems he didn't understand, built on foundations he didn't lay. "I'll need access to my files," I said calmly. "Your company-issued laptop and devices will remain here," the other consultant said. "All intellectual property developed during your employment belongs to Orex Innovations." There was the assumption that had been baked into their decision from the start. I stood, picked up the folder without opening it and walked toward the door. Brandon finally looked at me then and I saw something flicker across his face. Not guilt. Relief. He thought the hard part was over. He had no idea what was coming. I didn't go home immediately. Instead, I drove to the waterfront, parked near the old shipping docks, and sat in my car watching seagulls fight over discarded food. My phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from colleagues who'd already heard the news. "Are you okay? What happened? This doesn't make sense." None of them would understand. Not yet. They still believed the story Orex told about itself. The narrative Brandon had carefully constructed where he was the visionary and the rest of us were replaceable parts. But there was something Brandon didn't know. Something buried so deep in the legal architecture of Orex's founding that even I had almost forgotten it. Back in 2000, when Orex was barely surviving, my attorney friend Naomi Fletcher had given me advice over coffee at a cramped diner near the courthouse. "Riley," she'd said, tapping her pen against a stack of incorporation documents. "File the provisional patent under your name first. You can assign it to Orex later once the company stabilizes. Protect yourself." I'd hesitated, felt paranoid, almost disloyal. "Trust me," Naomi had insisted. "These things have a way of getting messy when money gets involved." So I'd filed it. The Adaptive Biosignal Processing Algorithm, provisional patent application filed under Riley and Wells. I'd planned to transfer it formally once Orex secured series of funding. But then came the chaos, the rapid expansion, the revolving door of CFOs and legal teams. The paperwork got buried under years of reorganizations and mergers. And I never completed the assignment. Now sitting in my car with the severance folder unopened beside me, I pulled out my phone and searched through my archived email. It took 15 minutes of scrolling through old messages before I found it. Naomi's email from August 2000 with the provisional patent confirmation attached. My hands were steady as I opened the PDF. There was my signature, my filing, my algorithm. But that wasn't the most important part. I scrolled down to the clauses Naomi had insisted we include. Standard protections, she'd called them. Safeguards in case things went wrong. And there, in Section 7, subsection C, I found the sentence that would change everything. In the event of involuntary termination without cause, all intellectual property rights revert to the original filer within 48 hours, pending formal USPTO review. Brandon had just fired me without cause. No performance warnings, no documented failures, just a sudden realignment that conveniently removed the one person who knew exactly how valuable my work had become. Which meant the algorithm didn't belong to Orex anymore. It belonged to me. I called Naomi from the parking lot. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp with the efficiency of someone who bills by the minute. Riley? I heard about Orex. Are you all right? I need you to pull a file, I said. Provisional patent from 2000. Adaptive biosignal processing algorithm. Pause. Then I heard the sound of fingers flying across a keyboard. Riley, please tell me you didn't assign this. I never got around to it. Another pause, longer this time. When Naomi spoke again, her voice had changed, sharpened into something I recognized from courtrooms. You understand what this means? Tell me I'm reading it right. You are. Involuntary termination without cause triggers automatic reversion. The USPTO will process it as soon as you file notice. 48 hours from your termination time. I checked my watch. 10:47 a.m. Brandon had fired me at 9:15. Naomi, what's Orex worth right now? Last valuation I saw was around $8 billion. But that's heavily dependent on their proprietary systems, which means it's dependent on my algorithm. Exactly. Riley, if you file this, you won't just own a patent. You'll own the foundation of their entire diagnostic platform. Every product they've launched in the last decade relies on your work. I stared out at the water, watching a cargo ship slide slowly toward the horizon. File it, I said. You're sure? Completely. Then I'll prepare the reversion notice. But Riley, once this goes public, there's no walking it back. Orex will fight this with everything they have. Let them fight. I ended the call and sat in the silence of my car, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, though that was there too. Not vindication, not yet. Clarity. For 26 years I'd been invisible. The engineer behind the curtain while others took bows. The woman whose name appeared in footnotes while executives got conference keynotes. Brandon thought he could erase me with a severance check and a security escort. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. By Wednesday morning the filing was complete. Naomi worked through the night, assembling documentation, cross-referencing clauses, and preparing the USPTO submission. At 6:23 a.m. she sent me a single-line text. It's official. The clock is ticking. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table watching sunrise light filter through the windows. My dog Cooper, a 12-year-old golden retriever with graying fur and endless patience, rested his head on my knee. Big day, I told him. He thumped his tail once, unimpressed. My phone lit up with the first message at 7:41 a.m. It was from Elliot Grant, a senior systems architect who'd worked under my supervision for 8 years. Riley, something weird is happening. Legal just pulled all access logs for the adaptive system. They're asking who has core documentation. I didn't respond. Not yet. The second message arrived at 8:15 a.m., this time from Veronica Hayes, the VP of Engineering and one of the few executives who'd ever acknowledged my contributions publicly. Riley, I don't know what you did, but legal is in full panic mode. They found something in the patent registry. Brandon is locked in his office with the entire legal team. I smiled into my coffee. The third message came at 8:52 a.m. from a number I didn't recognize. When I opened it, I saw it was from an intern named Jamie Ortiz, someone I'd mentored during a summer program 2 years ago. Ms. Wells, I think you should know. They just ran a verification check on the adaptive system patents. Your name came up as the registered owner. Mr. Keller told everyone it's a clerical error, but the legal team looks terrified. There was. The moment Orex discovered that their flagship technology, the algorithm powering every diagnostic tool they sold, no longer belonged to them. I finished my coffee slowly, methodically. Then I pulled up the USPTO public portal and searched for my filing. Sure enough, the listing had updated overnight. Adaptive Biosignal Processing Algorithm Owner, Riley and Wells status. Active reversion date. Involuntary termination trigger. Effective 48 hours from filing notice. Pling. Irrefutable. Catastrophic. At 9:34 a.m. Veronica called directly. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Riley, please tell me what I'm seeing isn't real. It's real. You own the adaptive system? I always did. Orex just forgot to check. She exhaled slowly, the sound of someone watching a building tilt on its foundation. Riley, Brandon is losing his mind. He's telling the board this is sabotage, that you're trying to destroy the company. I didn't fire myself, Veronica. Another pause. No, you didn't. Her voice softened. Riley, what happens now? That depends on what Brandon does next. He's calling an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. They're bringing in outside counsel. Good. Tell them I'm available for negotiations. But only if Brandon isn't in the room. Riley. He had his chance to value my work. He chose severance papers instead. I ended the call before she could respond. Then I texted Naomi. Orex will reach out today. Prepare terms. Her response came immediately. Already done. You're going to enjoy this. The call came at 2:17 p.m. Not from Brandon, not from Veronica, but from Wyatt Cooper, the board chair and a man whose reputation for strategic ruthlessness was legendary in biotech circles. Ms. Wells, he began, his voice carrying the measured calm of someone used to controlling crisis situations. I believe we have a situation that requires immediate discussion. Mr. Latham. I've reviewed the USPTO filings. Your counsel has been quite thorough. Naomi's excellent at her job. Indeed. Ms. Wells, I'll be direct. Orex cannot operate without licensing rights to your algorithm. Our entire product ecosystem depends on it. If we can't demonstrate clear ownership by Friday's investor call, our valuation will collapse. Then you should have thought about that before firing me. A brief silence. I heard papers rustling in the background, voices murmuring. Ms. Wells, I want you to understand something. Brandon made a significant error in judgment. The board was not informed of your termination until this morning. Had we known, you would have stopped him? We would have approached the situation differently. That's not the same thing. Another pause, longer this time. You're right. It's not. Wyatt's tone shifted slightly, became less scripted. Riley, may I speak candidly? Please do. Brandon has been problematic for some time. The board has been discussing transition plans. Your termination accelerated a conversation we should have had months ago. I walked to my kitchen window, watching Cooper dig holes in the backyard with the dedication of someone who believes treasure exists everywhere. What are you asking, Wyatt? I'm asking if you're willing to meet with the board. Tonight. Without Brandon present. And if I refuse? Then tomorrow morning, Orex begins the most expensive legal battle in biotech history, one we cannot afford to fight and cannot afford to lose. I let the silence stretch, listening to the weight of his desperation. Where and when? Finally asked. The Harborside Hotel. Suite 1847. 7 p.m. I'll be there. But Wyatt, understand something. I'm not coming to save Orex. I'm coming to discuss terms that reflect my actual value. I wouldn't expect anything less. The Harborside Hotel suite was expensively neutral, the kind of space designed for conversations that couldn't happen in public. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, lights beginning to flicker on as dusk settled over the waterfront. The board sat around a conference table, 7 faces arranged like a jury. Wyatt at the head, Veronica to his right, and 5 others whose names I knew from quarterly reports but whose faces I'd rarely seen up close. Brandon was notably absent. Ms. Wells, Wyatt stood as I entered, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. Thank you for coming. I sat, placed my folder on the table and waited. Naomi had taught me years ago that silence is a weapon when used correctly. Wyatt cleared his throat. We've had extensive discussions this afternoon about the current situation. The board acknowledges that your termination was handled inappropriately. Inappropriately, I repeated. That's one way to describe it. A woman to Wyatt's left, someone I recognized as Eleanor Fitch, the board's financial analyst, spoke up. Ms. Wells, we've reviewed the provisional patent and the reversion clause. Our counsel confirms your legal standing is solid. Which means we need to discuss licensing arrangements. Before we discuss licensing, I said, I need to understand something. Who made the decision to fire me? The board members exchanged glances. Veronica looked down at her hands. Wyatt answered. Brandon presented it as a routine workforce optimization. He claimed your role had become redundant due to system automation advances. Redundant. The word tasted bitter. The systems he's referring to were built using methodologies I developed. I wrote the training documentation. I designed the optimization protocols. I personally debugged the integration failures that almost killed our largest hospital contract last year. Eleanor leaned forward. We weren't aware of your direct involvement in those situations. Brandon's reports credited the engineering team collectively. Of course he did. Brandon had spent 5 years systematically erasing my contributions, rewriting history to position himself as the architect of innovations he barely understood. Let me be very clear, I said, looking at each board member in turn. The adaptive system isn't just something I worked on. Something I invented. Every core function, every processing layer, every optimization algorithm traces back to methodologies I developed between 2000 and 2010. What Orex has built over the past 15 years is elaborate scaffolding around a foundation that belongs to me. The room absorbed this information in uncomfortable silence. Wyatt spoke carefully. Ms. Wells, what are your terms? I opened my folder, revealing the document Naomi and I had prepared. 7 pages of precisely crafted clauses, each one designed to correct years of being overlooked. First, I began, Orex will license the adaptive system from me directly. Exclusive licensing, renewable annually, at a rate that reflects the algorithm's actual market value. Eleanor pulled out a calculator. What rate are you proposing? 8% of gross revenue from all products utilizing the system. The number landed like a brick. Eleanor's eyes widened. Wyatt sat back in his chair. 8% of gross revenue, Eleanor repeated slowly. That's approximately $340 million annually at current revenue levels. Yes. Ms. Wells, that's less than what Orex has gained from my algorithm over the past decade. Considerably less. Wyatt rubbed his temples. What else? Second, full public recognition as the inventor and architect of the adaptive system. Not a footnote in technical documentation. Real recognition. My name on patents, on product literature, in investor presentations. Veronica nodded slowly. She understood what that meant. Visibility. Credibility. The acknowledgement I'd been denied for 26 years. Third, I continued, Brandon Keller resigns immediately. Not a transition, not a graceful exit strategy. He leaves tonight. The room went silent. Someone coughed. Wyatt's jaw tightened. Ms. Wells, he said carefully, asking us to remove a sitting seat. He fired the person whose work built this company. He systematically took credit for innovations he didn't create. He jeopardized your entire valuation because he couldn't be bothered to review the legal foundations of your intellectual property. Wyatt, you said the board was already discussing transitions. I'm simply accelerating your timeline. Eleanor spoke quietly. She's right. Brandon's mismanagement of this situation alone is grounds for removal. A board member I didn't know, an older man with silver hair, raised his hand slightly. Ms. Wells, if we agree to these terms, will you consider returning to Orex in an advisory capacity? I hadn't expected that question. The room waited. No, I said finally. I won't be coming back. May I ask why? I thought about how to phrase it, how to explain 26 years of being invisible without sounding bitter. Because Orex didn't value me when I was here. You're negotiating with me now out of necessity, not recognition. If I return, I become the person you rescued from my own leverage. I'll never be seen as anything more than a problem you solved. The silver-haired board member nodded slowly. That's remarkably self-aware. I've had 26 years to develop self-awareness. Wyatt stood, walked to the window, stared out at the darkening city. When he turned back, his expression had shifted from negotiation to resignation. "The board will need to vote," he said. "But speaking personally, Ms. Wells, I believe your terms are fair. More than fair given what you're owed." "There's one more thing," I added. "What's that?" "I want it in writing that Orex acknowledges the algorithm's ownership history. Not buried in legal documents. A public statement. Because there are other engineers in this industry watching to see if someone like me can be erased. And I want them to know the answer is no." Eleanor smiled, a small genuine expression that transformed her entire face. "I'll draft it myself," she said. Brandon's resignation was announced at 9:47 p.m. that night, delivered via a terse press release that used phrases like, "pursuing other opportunities," and "mutual agreement." The business press would spend days dissecting what really happened, but the people inside Orex knew the truth within hours. I watched the news from my living room, Cooper asleep on the couch beside me, his head resting on my lap. My phone exploded with messages. Colleagues, former interns, industry contacts I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone wanted to know what happened, how I'd done it, what came next. I didn't answer most of them. Instead, I opened my laptop and read the public statement Eleanor had sent for my approval. Orex Innovations acknowledges that the foundational algorithm powering our adaptive system was invented and developed by Riley Wells during her 26-year tenure with our company. Ms. Wells' contributions to biomedical data processing have been transformative, and we are grateful for the opportunity to continue utilizing her innovations through licensing arrangements. We recognize that proper attribution of intellectual property is essential to maintaining trust within the scientific and engineering communities. It was more than I expected. More than most engineers ever get. Naomi called at 10:15 p.m., her voice carrying satisfaction that comes from winning decisively. "Riley, I just received the signed contracts. The board approved everything. 8% gross revenue, annual renewals, public recognition, the works. And Brandon's severance package was significantly reduced due to breach of fiduciary duty." He actually breached duty? "The board determined his failure to review the patent situation before terminating you constituted negligence." Eleanor pushed hard for accountability. I smiled. Eleanor had been quiet during most of the negotiation, but I'd seen her taking notes, calculating impacts, building a case. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you collect licensing fees. And Orex spends the next decade paying for the mistake of undervaluing you." "That's not what I meant." Naomi paused. "What did you mean?" I looked at Cooper, his chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. "I mean, what do I do with this? The recognition, the money, the vindication. What comes next?" "Riley, you've just secured one of the largest individual licensing agreements in biotech history. You can do whatever you want." "I know. That's the problem. For 26 years, I knew exactly what my purpose was. I built systems. I solved problems. I kept Orex running. And now you get to decide what Riley Wells does when she's not saving other people's companies." 3 weeks later, I sat in the office of a commercial real estate agent, reviewing floor plans for a renovated warehouse space near the old manufacturing district. High ceilings, natural light, enough room for the laboratory and development space I'd been sketching in notebooks since the negotiation ended. The agent, a cheerful woman named Carolyn Brooks, pointed to the loading dock area. "This space could easily be converted to a clean room if you need controlled environments." "I'll need several," I said. "Medical device testing requires isolation." "You're starting a medical device company?" "Biomedical processing systems. Similar to what I did before but focused on accessibility. Hospital-grade diagnostic tools at prices community clinics can afford." Carolyn's expression shifted from sales pitch to genuine interest. "That sounds important." "It is. There are thousands of clinics that can't afford the systems companies like Orex produce. They're locked out of advanced diagnostics because the market only serves wealthy hospitals. I'm going to change that." "And you can do this on your own?" I thought about the licensing fees that would start flowing next quarter. 8% of Orex's gross revenue. Enough to fund a startup without venture capital, without board oversight, without executives who thought confidence mattered more than competence. "Yes," I said. "I can do this on my own." Carolyn handed me the lease agreement. "Then let's make it official." I signed on the last page, my signature steady and sure. Riley and Wells, founder and CEO Wells Biosystems. It had taken 26 years, one catastrophic firing and a patent reversion to get here. But for the first time since I'd written that first algorithm on a whiteboard in 2001, I wasn't building something for someone else's company. I was building my own. The warehouse transformation took 4 months. Contractors converted the loading dock into a Class 10,000 clean room. Electricians rewired the entire building to support laboratory equipment. I hired 12 people, engineers and technicians I'd worked with over the years, people who understood that innovation happens in the spaces between what exists and what should exist. We called ourselves Wells Biosystems, and our mission was simple: make advanced diagnostic technology accessible to everyone. The first prototype was a compact biosignal processor that could perform real-time analysis using a fraction of the computing power traditional systems required. Small enough to fit in a community clinic, affordable enough that rural hospitals could deploy multiple units. I built it using methodologies I'd developed over 2 decades, approaches that Orex had never bothered to optimize because their market didn't demand efficiency. They sold to wealthy hospitals with unlimited budgets. I was designing for the clinics that operated on grants and hope. On a Thursday afternoon in April, I was in the lab running stress tests when my phone buzzed. Wyatt Cooper's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity won. Wyatt. Riley, I hope I'm not interrupting. I'm in the lab. What can I do for you? Boss. I wanted you to know something. Orex is launching a new initiative focused on accessible diagnostics. Eleanor proposed it to the board last month. Lower-cost systems for underserved markets. I stopped walking, stood still in the middle of the lab. That's wonderful, I said carefully. Riley, I'm telling you this because the initiative was inspired by you. By what you're building. Eleanor said, and I quote, "If Wells can do it independently, we should be able to do it with our resources." You've changed how this board thinks about market responsibility. Something warm and unexpected spread through my chest. Not vindication exactly. Something quieter. Thank you for telling me, Wyatt. There's something else. Brandon has been trying to launch a competing startup. He's been approaching investors with claims that he pioneered the adaptive system technology. Of course he has. Most investors are aware of the situation. They've seen the public statements, reviewed the patent history. He's not getting traction. But I thought you should know he's still attempting to take credit. Wyatt, can I tell you something? Please. I don't care what Brandon does anymore. He spent 5 years building a reputation on borrowed credibility. Eventually people notice. The truth has a way of surfacing, especially in industries where results matter more than pitch decks. Wyatt chuckled softly. You've become remarkably zen about this. I have a company to build. I don't have time to worry about Brandon's delusions. Fair enough. Riley, one last thing. If you ever need resources, partnerships, manufacturing capacity, Orex would be honored to work with Wells Biosystems. I smiled. I'll keep that in mind. After the call ended, I stood in the warehouse space I'd transformed, surrounded by equipment I'd purchased, systems I'd designed, a team I'd built from the ground up. Orex hadn't destroyed me when they fired me. They'd freed me to become something they could never be. Independent, focused, and uncompromising in my vision. We launched our first product on a Tuesday morning in June. The Cascade Diagnostic Processor, a portable biosignal analysis system designed for clinics with limited resources. Price point, $18,000, compared to Orex's $200,000 flagship model. The press coverage was immediate and extensive. Tech journalists called it disruptive. Medical publications praised the accessibility angle. And buried in the third paragraph of every article was my name, Riley Wells, former Orex engineer, creator of the original adaptive system. The recognition felt surreal. For 26 years I'd been a footnote. Now I was a headline. Orders started arriving within hours. Small clinics in rural Montana. Community hospitals in urban Texas. International health organizations working in regions where traditional diagnostic equipment was impossibly expensive. By the end of the first week, we had a 6-month backlog. Veronica called on Friday afternoon, her voice carrying genuine warmth. Riley, I saw the launch coverage. Congratulations. Thank you, Veronica. I mean it. What you've built is remarkable. And I need to tell you something. What's that? Half the engineering team at Orex has your product specs printed on their desks. They're using Cascade as a benchmark for what's actually possible when you prioritize function over profit margins. I leaned back in my office chair, looking out at the warehouse floor where my team was assembling units, running quality checks, preparing shipments. Veronica, do you remember the day Brandon fired me? Of course. You told me later that you tried to stop it, that you argued in the executive meeting. I did. For whatever that's worth. It's worth more than you think. You were the only person in that building who pushed back. The only one who said my name out loud and insisted I mattered. Her voice softened. Riley, you always mattered. Some of us just didn't have the courage to say it when it counted. You said it when you could. That's enough. We talked for a few more minutes about technical specifications, about the industry's reaction to Cascade, about the ways biomedical processing was evolving. When the call ended, I sat quietly, feeling the weight of something I'd been carrying for decades finally lift. Validation isn't about proving you're right. It's about reaching the point where you no longer need to prove anything. By the end of the first year, Wells Biosystems had deployed Cascade systems in 47 states and 12 countries. Revenue hit $63 million. Our team expanded to 42 people. And industry analysts started using a phrase I found both amusing and accurate. Wells is Orex's most dangerous competitor. Dangerous because I understood their technology from the inside. Because I knew which features hospitals actually needed versus which ones existed to justify premium pricing. Because I'd spent 26 years watching executives prioritize shareholder value over medical impact. Orex's stock had dropped 18% since Cascade launched. Not catastrophic, but enough to generate concerned questions from investors about market positioning and competitive response. Wyatt called in November, his voice carrying a request I'd been half expecting. Riley, the board would like to discuss a potential acquisition. Of Wells Biosystems? Yes. We believe there's strategic value in bringing your innovations back into the Orex ecosystem. I walked to the window of my office, looking down at the warehouse floor where my team was testing our second-generation processor. Wyatt, what would Orex offer? We're prepared to discuss a valuation in the range of $200 million. Full integration of your technology, leadership position for you, autonomy over the accessibility division. $200 million. 18 months ago, Orex had offered me a severance package worth 1 year's salary. That's a generous offer, I said carefully. But you're going to decline. How did you know? Because you didn't start Wells Biosystems to get acquired. You started it because Orex taught you exactly what you didn't want to become. I smiled. Wyatt understood more than I'd given him credit for. You're right. I'm not selling. Wells Biosystems is staying independent. I figured as much. Riley, may I ask you something off the record? Go ahead. Do you regret how things happened? The termination, the reversion, all of it. I thought about the question, really considered it. No, I said finally. I regret the 26 years I spent being invisible. But getting fired was the best thing that could have happened. It forced me to see my own value. And it gave me the freedom to build something that actually matters. For what it's worth, Wyatt said quietly, the board understands we made a significant mistake. Not just in failing to recognize your contributions, but in creating a culture where people like Brandon could thrive while people like you got overlooked. Wyatt, you can't change culture by acknowledging mistakes. You change it by promoting different people, rewarding different behaviors, measuring different outcomes. Does Orex do that now? A long pause. We're trying. Then keep trying. Because there are hundreds of engineers at Orex right now who are watching to see if competence actually gets rewarded or if it's still just about who presents well in boardrooms. Wells Biosystems' second product launched in March, a cloud-based analytics platform that allowed clinics to share diagnostic data securely, enabling rural doctors to consult with specialists in real time. We called it Bridge Network, and it fundamentally changed how underserved communities accessed medical expertise. The impact was immediate and measurable. Emergency response times dropped. Diagnostic accuracy improved. Patient outcomes in rural hospitals began approaching urban levels. The medical community took notice. Then the government took notice. Then the media took notice. I gave a keynote address at the National Biomedical Engineering Conference in September. The auditorium held 3,000 people. Every seat filled with attendees standing in the back. I talked about accessibility, about the responsibility engineers have to build technology that serves everyone, not just profitable markets. I talked about the 26 years I spent being overlooked and how that experience shaped my understanding of what matters. But mostly I talked about the fact that getting fired was the catalyst that forced me to stop waiting for recognition and start building something worth recognizing. The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. Afterward, in the speaker's lounge, a young engineer approached me. She looked nervous, clutching a conference program. "Ms. Wells, I'm Destiny Palmer. I work at a small medical device startup. I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For showing us it's possible. I've been the only woman on my engineering team for 3 years. I designed our core product, but my manager keeps presenting it as a team effort. I was starting to think I'd never get credit for my own work. And then I read about what happened with you and Orex.